everybody. My name is Megan. I'm here with Crossroads Psychological. I'm a therapist there with my colleague.
Hi, I'm Brad Bernstein, one of the providers at Crossroads. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and tonight we just have everybody on to talk about going back to school and the best ways to set yourself up for success as well as your kids. Yeah.
So we actually thought we would start with talking about parent anxiety. What does your own anxiety around going back to school feel like? With your kids going back to school, how much of the anxiety in the house could be stemming from you versus your child?
Yeah. So something just to consider in that is, what have you been doing for yourself in this? Have you been doing any kind of self-care? Like, what kinds of things have been helping people? So I'm curious if anybody here has anything that they've done that they think has been helpful, or from the chat, if you have something, you could kind of throw it in the chat. Just help with your own anxiety and the transition. Exercise, that's a good one, yeah. Okay. Anything from the chat?
I know you're a barista.
Yeah.
Being open with your kids about what your anxiety is, kind of modeling for them. It's okay to have anxiety. It's okay to say that you have anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, is, making it, talking about it in the house, about like just getting it all out. I work at a school also, and when we had new students come and their families, the question I asked the parents were, how many of your children were anxious this morning when they came to school? And about half of them put their hands up. And I said, how many of you are anxious? They all put their hands up. So I think that really says a lot, that there's just a lot of anxiety out there. I think back to school brings anxiety, but I think being in COVID again, for many of our students going back for the first time in 18 months, it's just kind of taking steps backwards in terms of what is it like. So it's, I think it's really real. I think most people are feeling some level of anxiety, and I think it's to be expected. So going back to what Megan was saying, like that self-care piece is super important right now.
Yeah, and I love the exercise idea. And I'm glad that you brought up that idea of modeling, because something just to consider is modeling the idea of how to behave or how to look forward to school at home. So being open with your anxiety is a great way to kind of like open up discussion about anxiety in general, right? And then also modeling some positive ideas about school, even if maybe you're not 100% feeling it. So that could look like, wow, you're going to have a great day. I can't wait for you to hear about all your new teachers, or, a lot of these kids are back. So tell me about how your day went. That sounds really exciting. Kind of injecting some positivity for them and setting that expectation that maybe school will be a good thing instead of just a huge ball of anxiety about it.
Yeah, and not focusing on like the critical parts of the day. So what was the bad part of the day? What did you not like? Or if your child comes home and is like, I had the worst day, or, so-and-so really annoyed me, or whoa, I think spinning that or changing that really quickly so that what were the positives. I think that's really important. Often, yes, we should let our children vent, but quickly pivot to the positives so that they can move on, and that we're not modeling just venting. So kind of back to that self-care piece, like what are some other suggestions that adults can do in order to take care of themselves this time of year?
Well, the exercise is a great one. Just seeking support in general sometimes can be really helpful. If you have other friends, like adult friends who have children that are going back to school, sometimes just having like some discussions around with each other, or if you have a spouse or a partner, just kind of being open to talking about things sometimes can really be helpful. How about you, Brad? Anything you want to add in terms of self-care ideas?
So sleep is really important, and we'll get to talking about sleep specific in a little bit. But I think just making sure you're getting enough sleep, eating well, and then doing things as a family. The weather's starting to cool down, which is awesome. So getting out, there's a lot of fall events, safe events outside to take advantage of. I know, it's hard because like some of the normal things we would say, maybe people still don't feel comfortable with because of COVID and Delta being out there. But there's apple picking and pumpkin picking, like all that fun fall things that are coming up, and just going hiking. This is just a great time of year to be outside. So definitely doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and something else that made me think of, I know we're going to talk about this later for the kids too, but just having your own routine. We always talk about how important it is for kids to have routine and, establish boundaries and all this stuff, but it's important for adults too. It can really help create more stability, especially if you're feeling anxious. So kind of having something that you're doing, it could be something so simple as after I drop my kids off at school, I go get myself a cup of coffee, something that you're really looking forward to, just like a little routine, or maybe looking at your whole day and figuring out other things that I could adjust to better manage my time, or maybe make use of like a break to, like you said, be outside, take a walk, do something nice for yourself when you have the opportunity.
And it's something that personally that I've done in kind of align with the beginning of the school year is I've started meditating. I did a meditation retreat a couple of weekends ago online, and I've been waking up early, like at 5 a.m. just to get in my daily meditation for 30 minutes. And it's a little, I have to give some sleep up, but it's one of the, I've been telling my students, it's one thing that, by meditating, I feel calmer and I feel more energized. There aren't many things out there where you can feel calm and energized at the same time. So if you haven't tried meditating, highly recommend it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Really excited about that.
Cool.
So why are we talking about, I know we named it earlier, but let's to review before we move on. Why is it so important for adults to be mindful of their own anxiety right now?
Well, I think you're right. Maybe we didn't name that explicitly. I think kids are very insightful, which I'm sure many parents out there already know, and they'll pick up on your anxiety. They can, even if you're trying to model positivity and you're trying to not let them see that you're really anxious, they can pick up on those things. There's little, adjustments in behavior or speech pattern, or just like tiny little things maybe that you don't even think are giving it away, and they pick up on it and it sets a tone. And so then kind of spills over into their own anxiety. Like if my parents are anxious about school, then something is wrong. So then I should be anxious about school. So just kind of like sets the tone and models that for them.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Is just being really mindful of just the air in the house and the climate, and just air out, moving to the sides of just positivity right now, especially as we get going and getting into this routine. So speaking of routine structure, shifting to like the student perspective now, what should we be thinking about? Parents should be thinking about as we think about a student's routine going back into school.
Yeah. So I know something that I've seen a lot with the kids that I see is that the routine has been a little bit of an adjustment, especially like waking up early in the morning, being out all day, and like socializing with their peers. Like the routine has definitely been different than it's probably been for the last 18 months for a lot of kids out there. And it's very tiring. So something that I've been seeing a lot is just trying to build in some downtime. Like when they get home from school, having that ability to just decompress a little bit. Maybe, if you have like a little one, if they're not getting like a nap or something, just like something small where they could kind of relax and decompress, and maybe just like sleep, or, what if you have the opportunity. Now, obviously, as kids get older, it gets harder, right? Like we don't want them sleeping until 6 o'clock and messing up their bedtime or running into other after school activities. But just considering trying to build in some downtime for them, I think has been something that I've seen that's been pretty helpful.
Yeah, I know the first couple of days, we've been in school. Most students have been in school for at least a week now.
Yeah.
But just how tired they were after the first couple of days. Just again, it's typical post summer you take some time to get readjusted to school. But for those students that have been out for the 18 months, which is quite a number, I think it's taken more time just to kind of get the lay of the land, and as I'm calling it, like getting their school legs back, right? It's a big adjustment if you haven't been doing it. Just as my patients talk about, just like getting used to like crowded hallways again, like all those people, even if they went into school last year in the spring, it wasn't as crowded because only half the students. So, but now, everyone's there. It's a big adjustment. It's draining.
Yeah.
It's just so much stimulations going on. So that's a big adjustment. Going around to all the different classrooms. Last year, they were more just isolated in the one room. So that's a big adjustment. Lunch, cafeteria, like where do I sit? Who do I sit with? Some students haven't seen, we'll talk more about like the social piece in a minute, but some students haven't seen other kids, which is crazy for 18 months. Like, it's just still like mind blowing to me that there are people because of circumstances just haven't seen other students their age for that long a time.
And that can be rough, right? Like, we think about how tiring it is as an adult sometimes to like go out all day and be around people and interact and all this stuff, but it's the same for kids and teenagers, right? Like, we kind of take that for granted sometimes. We're kind of like, go make friends, have fun, you'll be great, and then we take for granted that it can still be tiring for them too.
Yeah.
Even if you have like a very social kid, even if you have a super extroverted kid, it can still be tiring sometimes,
Right.
especially when they're getting used to it. Because like you said, I mean, some of these kids might not have been around peers for a while now. So yeah, just keeping that in mind.
Yeah, COVID was great for the kids with social anxiety because they could, hide at home. Like, that was one benefit for those students. But to jump back into it without having practiced it for such a long time, it's like major exposure therapy, which in some ways is good, but it's also probably overwhelming, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I think, also with the adjustment is, just getting used to interacting with teachers. And, we think about like for a year and a half, like a 9th grade student, they went from being a 7th grader in the building, really skipping their 8th grade year, and now in high school. Like, that's a big change. They're going back, not only there's in a different division, different level of school. And, I think that's can be overwhelming. I work with some freshmen who are just like, whoa, like what's going on? It's just like the expectations, just like, being from a couple hundred to like 1,000 students, and just, being with like adults, like seniors in high school, they're adults, and like, it's just like different. And, I think that's, it just takes some time, and we have to be patient and understanding of that, just what that looks like.
Right. Yeah. And I think that is the key, right? Is the time. I think a lot of kids, I mean, I've been really impressed. I've even seen some kids who just like within a week, they were back into it. They're like, oh, it feels like nothing ever changed. Like, it felt great. And then some kids are going to take a little bit longer. And that's kind of normal, right? Like, everybody's different. We know that, but there's no specific timeline that every single kid is going to be well adjusted back into being in person. So just kind of like being a little flexible with your expectations and being like, okay, maybe one of my kids is doing great and the other one is just kind of like taking a little bit longer, and taking that into account when you're trying to adjust the routine and stuff like that, I think could be helpful, because there's no prescription for this particular situation right now.
Yeah. And I think one important piece that we can try to prescribe is creating that daily routine and schedule. And so, starting in the morning, that there's a new wake up time, and what that morning routine looks like as they get ready for school. Like, even having to go to the bus, like that's something they haven't done in such a long time. And then like, dealing with the bus ride, getting to school, walking in the class, So I think trying to set up as much as day-to-day routine as possible. When they get home, they do this, With our older students, maybe it's not as prescribed, but it's more of a checklist. By dinner time, you need to have done these things, or by bedtime, you have to do these things. Versus with a younger student, it might be, hour by hour type scheduling.
Yeah. And even just having a bedtime, I think a lot of kids got away from that especially the older ones during quarantine and stuff, because it was just tiring and exhausting to try and keep with that routine. So trying to make sure that your kids are doing a regular bedtime and are waking up at the same time every day, just like those little things can really make that transition easier in reestablishing the routines and everything.
Yeah, I always tell my students, and I always talk about sleep, and sleep is one of those, I feel like, things that are just commonly overlooked. Oh, it's not such a big deal, but the research is definitely clear on sleep. It is so important for people to be rested, kids and adults. So I think that's something we often push to the side. But for really to be successful at school, it starts with having a good night's sleep.
Yeah. And I'm glad you bring that up, because I've noticed lately, actually, I've got some teenagers who think that 6 hours of sleep is plenty. I'm like, you should just check with next time you're at the pediatrician, I want you to ask your pediatrician how much sleep you're supposed to be getting. They're always like amazed how much sleep they think that, that is like the recommended amount, and they're almost never meeting it, which is, that is what it is, right? Like, we'll figure it out. But I would definitely check with your pediatricians and see, like, how much sleep is this kid supposed to be getting? And then honestly, they might even need a little bit more right now, right? Like you said, like they're just tired, right? Everything is difficult and the transition is rough. So yeah, I agree with you. The sleep though is a big thing, and I think a lot of people do take it for granted. Yep.
Does it ever work to catch up on sleep over the weekend and then kind of, not get any sleep during the week? Is that a sustainable pattern?
Great question. The answer is no, right? It's like a myth. So, I think what the research I have read and heard about is, it's your weekend sleep time, your bedtime shouldn't be more than an hour from like your school week. So if you typically go to bed at 10 p.m. on the school week, on the weekend, 11:30 should be the max. You shouldn't be getting too far away from your normal bedtime, because it just throws you out of whack. But in terms of like trying to catch up, I think that it doesn't work. It's more like, from what I understand, it's building reserves. So you can build reserves to help move forward, but not catch up. I think that's what the data shows. So, often we hear from students, or they just sleep until like noon or 1 p.m. on the weekend because they're just really tired. That's not really helping moving forward. That's or catching up from the past sleep. It's too late by that.
Right. Yeah, something that helped me understand that was this analogy of a bank account, that you can build it up, but it doesn't necessarily go down. Like, you can't go into the negative necessarily. Right. You could maybe build up, like you said, like some reserves, like little things here and there if you could try that way, but it's never gonna go to the negatives, and then you can just save up or use your reserves to fill up the negative time, right? Like, that's not how sleep works. So it's very interesting, and honestly, there's always like new research coming out about sleep, so I think it's a very fascinating topic. But thank you for your question.
Yeah, and if you feel like your child has issues with sleep, it's something definitely talk to the pediatrician about. If they see a therapist, talk to a therapist about, school counselor. There are definitely resources out there. You can always reach out to us, Megan or me, and we're happy to speak to you about that and supporting your child. So something we alluded to earlier was kind of like the social piece of this.
Yes. So something that, we always like to say is like social, they call it the social skills, because it is literally a skill, right? It's like riding a bike is a skill, or ice skating is a skill. It's something that you learn. And then if you don't practice, it can get a little rusty, right? Like, you don't do it as well as maybe you used to, and it can feel a little uncomfortable. You don't necessarily lose it though. It's just maybe requires some practice. And so I'm sure there's a lot of kids out there who probably feel a little rusty still, even maybe like 2 weeks later, right? We're like a week and a half in Howard County. No, it's a long week.
This is the third week.
This is the third week. Yeah, I was going to say 2.5. So it can feel a little rusty, right? Especially like with your own peer group. Like you said, some of them haven't been around their own peers. Maybe it's a sibling or a cousin or something like that, but it is different with your peers.
Yeah. I mean, I see it even at the school I'm at, this is our third week as well. There's still the students that haven't been in person for an extended period of time. There's just a gap. Even last year at my school, we were back for most of the year, but even that time we were out, there's still slippage. The social skills. We talk about summer slippage with academic skills, but there's with social skills, I think it's just the same thing. It's going to take time, and really, they missed a whole year, some of our students. So, if your child is an 8th grader, socially, they could really only be a 7th grader right now, depending on what types of experiences they had. I think that's really something important to consider. I know teachers are seeing it. They're commenting just, especially new students to the school or kids that have been out for the extended amount of time. There's just a big developmental difference between those students that had more practice.
Okay, that's interesting, actually. That I haven't talked to any teachers recently, but that makes a lot of sense. That, like the development maybe is different depending on if they were exposed at all. Some of them maybe had some exposure camps and stuff. I know people did some things, and some kids did go back at the end of last year, which wasn't exactly the same. It gave you a little bit.
A little bit, right.
So, yeah, I think then the key, right, is that practice. Yes, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, talk about how kids are, especially kids who have not matured the way we would expect them to, are kind of behind and be patient. My daughter's in kind of the opposite boat, where she was already more mature emotionally than some of her peers, and she's continued along that track. She's always felt a little disconnected from her peers, and now it's like that gap is even wider.
Right.
Because some of her peers haven't tracked along while she has. And how do you recommend someone coach their kids through that?
That's a tricky situation, especially because she's there with them every day. Like, those are her peers. You can't exactly skip a grade just for social benefits, right? You can hold a kid back for social benefits sometimes, but you don't necessarily skip ahead. Do you have any ideas?
I think if you can set them up in a safe environment, maybe where they are able to socialize with older students. So what grade is your daughter in?
She's a junior.
Junior. So, there are clubs at schools which are more senior heavy, activities where she's able to socialize with older students. I know some mature students, like you're describing, also like to spend time with adults because they're able to just relate more, which is good and bad, right? So I think providing some of that as well.
Sure.
But also I think it's also, she's a junior, so she, that's her peer group. So it's also being flexible on her part to understand where her peers are as well. So I think it's a give and take.
Yeah, I was gonna go ahead.
Doing structured activities. The more structured an activity is, it kind of reduces the difference between those of you who are more socially mature and advanced and those of us who aren't.
Yeah, and I think that could even be helpful for people who aren't, right? Like, if you're not super mature, it can help you feel a little bit more comfortable, or if you even are feeling a little more socially awkward, for whatever reason, those structured activities can be a little bit alleviating for the stress.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where, even at school, if you work in a school, you see this, like during class when there's structure, that social difference doesn't really matter. But when there's downtime, that's when it can be a big deal. Yeah. But really good question. But the other way, what I know we were talking earlier, you had a suggestion for like students that have been maybe out of practice, that they were trying maybe working with younger students.
Yeah. So if they're out of practice and you feel like they're a little bit behind, maybe, or even if they're not behind, but they're just feeling uncomfortable, setting up with some younger kids might be helpful, just because they kind of have a little bit of a leg up, right? They might feel a little more comfortable socializing with kids who are a little bit younger than them. So it does kind of go that other way. And the other thing I was thinking also, regarding your question, is to just, your daughter has been there before. So like drawing on that empathy of like, yes, I understand. I definitely recognize that like this is annoying and stuff, but like, do you remember what it was like when you were like that? And what do you think would have been good for you to hear? What do you think you would have, liked, or what do you think you wouldn't have liked? And maybe just trying to like get some of that empathy going a little bit, just to kind of encourage some better tolerance, because I'm sure it gets tedious for her. So
What do you suggest to her?
To be patient,
yeah.
try and connect with friends in smaller groups, to find those folks who are more like her and connect with them, and then also the structured activities.
Yeah, they're all great ideas.
So, I think we're talking about, just rebuilding some of those social skills. And what are some, we talk about structure. What are some structured ways of doing that, or providing opportunities for our kids to regain some of that?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the level, right? I know you could do play dates kind of thing, where you have a structured activity. If you have a little one, maybe like a craft or a game or something like that, and that can kind of go up in age as well. But then as your kids get older, things that are a little more maybe like group oriented, like sports, camps, clubs, what art classes, and these kinds of like after school, we would consider them extracurricular activities, can actually be really, really beneficial for social skills and like social development and just social connection in general. Yeah, that's I think a good place to start if you have those options. And most schools, I think, are doing a pretty good job, from what I've heard, of offering things like that for kids, because they recognize that it has been difficult. And I think, even the teachers and stuff were a little nervous to go back. So from what I've heard, they're being very mindful of it. So I definitely encourage you to look into what's available at the school in terms of like social engagement and activities.
Yeah, I think really encouraging, them to put themselves out there when appropriate. I work with a senior in high school who, 9th and 10th grade, pre-COVID was pretty reserved, kind of kept to himself. Junior year he was home, and then we've been working on really just pushing himself to make the best of his senior year. And he said, he's in cross country, and he's just really put himself out there, and he's just having a blast socially, hanging out with these new groups of people. And he's it's like the way high school should be. It should be fun.
Yeah.
So finding your own fun is important. What are you comfortable with, and and pushing yourself there.
Yeah, and that's great to hear, because in a lot of ways he missed out on
exactly,
a whole junior year, half
yeah.
of his sophomore year. He missed out a lot. So trying to get them to engage in that stuff, just so they get some normal high school experience, I think it's just beneficial in so many ways. Yeah.
And I think this is also a great opportunity if you're feeling not sure what to do, reaching out to your school counselor. I think partnering with the school, using resources, other parents. I think last year we talked about a lot about, I know I did, it's even in middle school, setting up a play date for your child, because they didn't really have that opportunity. I think even though they're back at school, still doing that, I think, there's still this catch up. So parents taking it, being a little bit more involved than they might normally be is okay.
Yeah. Especially if you're feeling like your child is having a hard time getting back into it, you taking the lead might actually alleviate some of that pressure for them, right? You setting that up, they might complain and whine about it, but they might also be glad that they don't have to take that step, and that they don't have to then coordinate something with their friend or whatever. So I think that's a very good point. You could definitely be helpful that way.
And so a group of students that I often think about are new students. We have new students for this school year, but the new students from last school year really never got their foot in the door because they weren't in the building. I think, if you are a new student last year, I would say you're a new student this year. I think this trying to go through that whole process again, and hopefully the school's supporting that. I think that's kind of being really patient. There could be some frustration that they didn't build any connections last year, but hopefully starting over and trying that again.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in the community, like you said, there's so many things right now, trying to get people to just like reconnect with their community, inside school and outside school. So just looking for maybe those opportunities as much as you're comfortable, it can really be helpful in trying to get them back into, just like feeling like themselves and feeling like they've got the hang of what this looks like. So.
Yeah. So speaking of, as we segue, so we talked about routine, structure, social skills. So if we like see this as like a big category of the students finding themselves again.
Yeah.
They kind of, where just putting it all back together. So what are some things we should consider?
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, I think the social skills and also just the tolerance, right? Like the tolerance to be able to wake up in the morning and go to school and have a full day of interaction and learning and come home and do their homework and eat dinner and participate with the family and go to bed. That is part of that finding themselves, right? And that might take a little bit of time. I'm sure there's some parents out there who are having a hard time right now with that whole transition. So I think that's a huge piece. It's just like the tolerance for the whole day.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, I think it just takes time. And, as we've said, I think really patience is a big, important takeaway from this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, if there's any activities that, you guys participated in before COVID that maybe are opening up again, and if you're comfortable trying to get back into some stuff like that, I definitely encourage those kinds of things. I've got some kids who like went back to soccer or went back to dance after being away for a while, and there was definitely some nervousness and a little bit of apprehension about returning to something that they've been away from. But like we said earlier, it's a skill, right? So they kind of catch back on pretty quickly, and it just is another opportunity for them to kind of find themselves. I like how you put that.
Yeah. So kind of like rebuilding the skills, something we haven't specifically talked about, like academic skills.
Yeah.
Like the work that they've done or might not, did they not progress as much as they normally would if they were out of the building for so long?
Yeah. Yeah. And something I've noticed a lot is kids who forgot how to stay organized and how to use an agenda or what that even looks like. Like I think I've got kids using their phone if the school allows it to kind of map things out, which is great. Just those organizational skills alone. I've definitely gotten rusty, I think, because online was a whole different beast. So trying to reinstate some of those, if you know that your kid had, certain methods that were helpful in the past, maybe trying to revisit those or maybe exploring new options if those are not working, to try to get things organized.
Yeah, it's almost like we paused. Or like ran at a different speed. So things didn't progress as fast as they should. I do executive functioning skill development was just something that definitely took a big hit.
For sure.
And the skills that they used last year are just different from what they typically would use in school. So I think that's really important to recognize. Again, at my school, two things that we're really focused on this year is rebuilding culture and climate in the school and doubling down on executive functioning skills. So I think just because both of those took a hit last year. So, as a parent, how can you support your child? Hopefully it's happening at school, but how can you also support at home with, organization, time management, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think, the kids always hate this, but just knowing what is due and when, right? Checking in, like what kinds of stuff is, so that's on your radar, and it also helps them keep it on their radar. Something like you said, the teachers sometimes help because they'll remind and be like, oh, by the way, don't forget this is due Friday or this is due tomorrow or whatever. And you just being that extra set of reminder, even if it's not necessarily well received, can be really helpful in reestablishing those skills. And then, like I said, like the agenda books, if you want to go paper and old school, or if you guys have like a system that you could use, like a calendar, an online calendar or something, just to kind of keep track, and then maybe then you could check in that way too, like look at what's due.
I know this is maybe old school, but I strongly recommend a planner, a paper planner. I think it's, we went on so much online last year. I just think, I don't think it served our students so well in terms of like organizational skills. I think with the planner, it helps track what we have to do. It's helpful for back mapping, looking at long-term assignments, and there's something to crossing things out. I think that's really, it's actually, I read a research paper on it. When you cross something else, cross something out on a to-do list, it actually releases dopamine in the brain. So it makes you feel good. So for those of you that are list makers, and you like crossing out, that's why.
Yeah.
So I just think like the planner, and I know, from my 20 years of experience in schools, students don't love planners, but it is so important that they use them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you can get them to use the paper planner, I agree. I think that is usually the best thing. It's the most effective way that I've seen it used. If there is something else out there, I'd love to hear it. If there is like some other method or system of planner that is not like a paper version, that'd be cool. But I have yet to see anything outside of like a calendar app. So
I think the other frustration is like how the learning management system here in Howard County, it's Canvas, every school could be a little bit different, but how that's being used differently. Like last year, the whole week was put up, and so students could see what's coming up for the week. But this year, I'm hearing that's not the case in some schools, that it's night by night. So there was a big reliance on that last year, and that maybe has been taken back a little bit this year. So again, I think there's some trenches in there, like going through, having your child understand their expectations. Like I had a conversation yesterday with a family. The child had he's 8th grader, had one expectation from his teachers in terms of like homework expectations, but back to school night, the parents went and dad came home with different expectations. So really clarifying, this is a good conversation because this has been going on for years, right? Ever since back to school night existed. So this is something that, we normally talk at this time of year, but I think understanding what those expectations are, being on the same page. So if you're on the same page, it's going to prevent that friction at home.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you have, and that's kind of one of those routines, right? Building that organization into the routine, the expectation of, you come home, you pull out your planner, you use your planner all day at school, and then maybe if mom or dad needs to just check that quickly or look it over or whatever that looks like in your house. So.
My boss at school says, trust but verify.
Yeah.
Right. So trust that they're going to do it, but look over their shoulder and make sure that they're doing it.
Yeah. Check in, look in their room, make sure they're not playing a video game and that they are doing homework, right? Yeah.
So I think in all this, we've kind of alluded to it, but like this is a great place to partner with schools, reaching out to your child's teachers, their counselor, not afraid to advocate, those that have IEPs and 504s, hopefully that didn't get lost in, the shuffle, and that teachers are, they've been out of the building too, so they might not have had to remember to use all that last year. So I think, making sure that the teachers are following those accommodations that are there.
Yeah. Speaking of it, I mean, like you said, sometimes I think it's just artist's mistake or somebody just overlooks it. So it doesn't hurt to just check in and be like, hey, just wanted to put this on your radar that, my child has these accommodations. Just so that, the teachers know that you are aware and that the teacher is aware and everybody's on the same page.
Right. I think I agree. Like it's not purposeful. I think having positive intent going into the conversation that everyone wants the same thing, which is best for your child.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We don't need to create more friction.
That's right. So how do we know, well, before we transition to our last kind of topic, any questions out there? All right. So quiet audience. So as we think about like, we talked about like normal back to school angst, and maybe this year is a little more because, COVID and being out for so long. How do we know when it's a bigger problem?
Yeah. So I think, you know, we are, like we said, patients. We're expecting some of this to be difficult, right? We're expecting it to be a kind of a rough transition. There is no perfect amount of time that this will be over. But something I always like to, you know, as a determining factor is the disruption more days than not? And then how many weeks has it been going? So we're not talking about like 1 week or even 2. We're talking about like more than that, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. Usually 6 is that marker where I start to think, okay, something's definitely going on here. That's not to say that it's still helpful to maybe seek help before that, so that you don't have to suffer for 6 weeks. But that's usually the marker for me when it's like 6 weeks and it's more days than not that things are not going well. That's usually an indicator that something else is going on, that it's not just normal, as you say, angst or like back to school jitters or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
So let's list out those things that could be happening. So we can just volley back and forth.
Yeah.
So the younger kids, or even older kids, tears. Like your child's coming home overwhelmed, just crying.
Yeah, crying or crying before school and just or
Right.
refusing to go at all.
Right. Sleep disturbance.
Yes.
Either they're not sleeping well or they're sleeping way too much.
Yeah, or their appetite, having your appetite be upset. Either they're eating way too much or they're not eating at all. I see a lot of like food refusal, just because their stomach hurts or they don't feel good or they just don't have an appetite.
Loss of interest. So they, always love doing this thing: soccer, lacrosse, baseball, art, drama, band, and now they just don't want to do it. And they haven't wanted to do it like in this period of time. Up until then, they did want to do it.
Yeah, and along with that, just isolation, being isolated from family, from peers, from whoever, people that maybe they normally would have seen. Or maybe that's been there for a little while, but it's gotten significantly worse. They won't leave their room. They don't want to do anything or interact with anybody.
Moodiness could be part of it.
Mhm.
That's, and I guess as a pause, like none of these on their own is a sign. The thing is when we see a pattern of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the moodiness or like the very anger outbursts.
Right.
So sometimes instead of tears, you'll see anger outbursts. And they kind of, or sometimes you see them together, right? So it just depends on the kid.
And I think it's also, this is a place where you need to get information from school, because some students keep it together all day long and then they get home and they fall apart.
Yeah.
And I think that we see that, or some students go into school, fall apart when they get home, then they're fine.
Yeah.
It could go either way.
Yeah.
Or some students are just really good at hiding. I think the scariest one is students that's really good at masking from everyone, so no one knows something's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ones that mask a lot, you'll see other signs, right? So that's when maybe you'll see the sleep disturbance, the appetite stuff, or even, some self-harm habits, those kinds of things where they're kind of taking it on themselves. They're not letting other people see what's going on. Yeah.
This happens for a week, things get better. Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
And usually a lot of times it does, things get better on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're looking at 4, 5, 6 weeks of putting these pieces together, what then?
Yeah, so that's when I would reach out. Obviously we've got therapists here that see kids and school age kids and everything. You could reach out also to the school counselor, maybe let them know what's going on, see if they have noticed anything or if they have any, referrals, or I've heard a lot of schools are trying to do some like more group things, which would be nice. So if there's anything available at the school, it might be a good opportunity to take advantage of those services as well.
Reaching out to your pediatrician.
Yeah.
Thing is, partnering with your pediatrician, having them help put the pieces together for you. They can, have conversations with your child, and maybe that your child will open up to them versus you. They can send some surveys, checklists to the school and have teachers fill out to try to get any information as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the pediatricians, if you have a pediatrician you like, they are usually very helpful. So That's always a good way to go as well. Yeah.
Is it a bad thing to reach out to a therapist?
No. I'm biased. No, I think, reaching out to a therapist, even just, I can't tell you how many phone calls I have with parents who, 75% of the time we talk about what's going on, and then we end up starting with, regular therapy treatments. And that can be, as little as 5 and much, much older. And then the other 25% of the time, sometimes we talk and I even tell them, like, it's only been a week.
Right.
Maybe you should give them a chance, give them an opportunity. Like, I'm happy to see him. Or we can kind of, look at this and reevaluate and call me back in a couple of weeks, right? It's not a crime to reach out and, just ask for even an opinion if you think that your child needs services.
As I tell my families at school and then, in private practice, we're resources, right?
Yeah.
We help provide, it's great to just have an initial conversation, a consultation,
Yeah.
just to provide you a different perspective, things to consider. So I would never hesitate to reach out to a therapist, just to, if you have a concern about your child. There's, I know there's community stigma around it. We're here to break that. We're nice people. We don't bite. I think, we serve a purpose for a reason.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, sometimes, depending on what school system you're in, there are sometimes therapists and school psychologists available at the school. So that'd be something you can also look into. So definitely take advantage of whatever services and opportunities are available to you. I think that is always helpful. Yeah.
Great. Questions? Are there any questions out there?
Yes.
Well, one whole topic which I don't have a good answer to is this idea of loss. I'm thinking specifically about high school students. You look forward to high school your entire life,
Yeah.
and there's a whole group of students that are lost out on pretty much almost half.
Yeah.
When they're frustrated, they're angry.
Yeah.
Whether it's just the social part, whether it's you have the athlete, the musician, the dancer, the person who does theater. They only had so many years of being able to do their activity in high school. And some of them lost out on half of that.
Yeah.
Depending on what season.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm also thinking about, academics. Kids have been told ever since they can hear, you have to do this, and this to get in college. And you have seniors this year, okay, who basically they have to do their college applications in next month. Now, they had a year and a half, most of which when they were freshmen were trying to figure out where the bathroom was, to do all the things to prove who they were and to separate themselves out. There's a lot of pressure on these kids, and they lost the opportunity.
Yeah.
And a lot of my patients are dealing with this, and obviously we talk about it, but I don't have an easy response to that.
I think definitely validating, right? Just validating that, that sucks. And you're right. You're right. They did miss out. There is a loss there.
There's reality to that.
Yeah.
Right. It's not going away. We can't erase it.
Right.
That I think validating and taking advantage of this year. You have it's for seniors. You have one more year. Take advantage of it. My patient is a senior. He's from day one has started taking advantage of it. It's awesome. I know that can't be everyone's story, but encouraging as much as possible to take advantage of that. And just to talk about the college pressure. There is a college for everyone. We often talk about the 50 colleges that people know about, but there are 2,000 colleges and universities in the country. So there is a college, there's a place for everyone. So I think, if we can get past, the brand names that we know and think about best fit. And college and universities know, they know the position these seniors are in. And I think they're everyone, it's not like it's just happened to 2 states, right? The whole country, the whole world. And I still can't get past it. I know in this same conversation last year, I probably said the same thing. what else in the world in our history has impacted the whole world during our lifetime? And it's still mind-boggling for me that we're still talking about COVID, still going on, it's still impacting the entire world.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, right? The colleges know.
Right.
So
There's
yes,
no secret.
they did miss out on that, and validating that. And then also everybody knows, like everybody's in the same boat here. So I'm sure they will figure something out, right? Like they were doing all kinds of things last year when everything was shut down. So it'll work out.
Yeah. And for those students that are, still upset and angry about this, and time, I know it's cliche, but I think part of it is just time moving on.
Yeah.
I also think about something you guys said earlier. These students are in a position where they're faced with all this and they don't know the answers. Sometimes, we have to model, how do we handle it when we don't know the answers?
Right.
Yeah.
I think the other part of that jump that's been hard, especially for those juniors and seniors, is not just being thrust into looking at colleges, but also a lot of these folks were freshmen, sophomores, like just learning the ropes of their sports team, of their club, of their whatever. And now all of a sudden they're back and they're the leaders.
Yeah.
And they missed that whole middle step of really learning how it works.
Yeah, it's that whole social skill development we talked about, and that's a very practical, applicable way that where it comes out, that they missed practicing, and they missed it being modeled to them.
Yeah. Even from their peers.
Closing thoughts.
I think just give it some time, right? Give it some patience. Don't hesitate to reach out. We're always here. There's plenty of more of us. So there's, people out there who want to help. So you guys don't have to do it by yourself.
Yeah, and I think just routine, structure, sleep is really important. Reducing the anxiety, modeling, for our children, partnering with schools. I think those are the takeaways. Trying to get back into just like a regular routine where students feel like they have ownership of what they're doing, and really at all levels. I think is important. And as Megan said, we're available at Crossroads to help with, consult, to talk through any concerns or questions that you have. And I want to. We didn't do this at the beginning, but we didn't say we're here at Mad City Coffee in Columbia, right across from our office, if you know where we are, Hickory Ridge and Cedar Lane. So we want to thank Mad City for hosting us. We're going to be doing this first Tuesdays of every month. There's a flyer on our website with some upcoming topics. If there's a topic you're really interested in, please reach out. We'd be happy to. Or we'll be here in person first Tuesday of each month at Mad City at 7 p.m. You're welcome to join us in person or stream online. So thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks guys.